Nasti vidya samam chakshuhu, nasti satya samam tapaha, nasti raga samam dukkham, nasti tyaga samam sukham. Meaning, there is no I like knowledge, no penance like truth, no sorrow like attachment, and no happiness like sacrifice. The ancient wisdom captured in this Sanskrit verse serves as a profound compass for the human soul, suggesting that our perception of reality is fundamentally flawed until it is filtered through the lens of true knowledge. When the poet claims there is no I like knowledge, they aren't talking about the physical act of seeing, but rather the internal clarity that allows us to distinguish between the temporary and the eternal. In our modern world, we often mistake information for wisdom. Yet this verse reminds us that true sight is the ability to look past the surface of things and understand their deeper essence. Without this intellectual and spiritual vision, we are essentially walking through life in the dark, bumping into obstacles that we could easily avoid if we only sought to learn. Knowledge is the ultimate tool for navigation because it illuminates the path ahead, turning the unknown into a landscape of opportunity and understanding. Moving into the realm of character, the verse posits that no penance or spiritual discipline can ever match the sheer power of truth. We often think of penance as a physical hardship or a complex ritual, but the hardest thing a person can do is live a life of absolute integrity. Truth is a form of internal fire that burns away deception and leaves behind a soul that is unshakable and pure. To be truthful is to be in harmony with the universe, and that alignment requires a level of courage and endurance that far exceeds any physical exercise. When we choose the truth, even when it is inconvenient or painful, we are engaging in the highest form of self-discipline because we are refusing to take the easy way out. This commitment to honesty becomes the foundation of a person's strength, proving that the most difficult spiritual work is simply being real in a world that often rewards the fake. The third pillar of this philosophy addresses the heavy burden of attachment, identifying it as the ultimate source of human sorrow. It is a radical idea to suggest that our likes and our deep cravings are the very things that cause us pain. But it is a psychological truth that resonates through the ages. When we tie our happiness to people, objects, or specific outcomes, we are essentially handing over the keys to our peace of mind. Attachment creates a persistent anxiety because everything in this world is subject to change and loss. The more we cling to things as if they were permanent, the more we suffer when they inevitably slip through our fingers. This isn't an argument against love, but rather a warning against the kind of desperate possessiveness that turns affection into a cage, ensuring that our hearts remain vulnerable to every shift in the wind. In stark contrast to the heaviness of attachment, the verse celebrates sacrifice as the ultimate source of happiness. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive part of the teaching, as we are often taught that happiness comes from getting what we want. However, the deepest, most resonant joy actually comes from the act of letting go or giving to something greater than ourselves. Sacrifice, or Tyaga, is the process of emptying the cup so that it can be filled with something more meaningful than mere self-interest. When we give up our ego, our time, or our resources for the benefit of others, we experience a lightness of being that taking can never provide. It is the joy of the gardener who plants a tree under whose shade they will never sit. It is a selfless satisfaction that transcends the small temporary pleasures of the material world. If we look at these four concepts together, we see a complete architecture for a life well lived, starting with the way we perceive the world. By prioritizing knowledge, we ensure that our foundation is built on reality rather than illusion. This clarity then allows us to value truth above all else, creating a character that is robust and dependable. Once we are grounded in truth, we can begin the difficult work of untangling ourselves from the attachments that keep us in a state of perpetual wanting. As those attachments fall away, we finally find the space to practice true sacrifice, which is the doorway to a lasting and sustainable happiness. It is a sequential journey of the spirit that moves from the outside in, refining the individual until they are no longer a slave to their impulses, but a master of their own destiny. The genius of this verse lies in its simplicity, using universal human experiences like sight and sorrow to explain complex metaphysical ideas. An American writer might observe that we spend our lives chasing the next big thing, believing that happiness is just one purchase or one promotion away. But this Sanskrit wisdom cuts through that noise by telling us that we are looking in the wrong direction entirely. Happiness isn't an acquisition, it's a subtraction. It is what remains when you stop clinging to things that don't matter and start focusing on the truth of who you are. We are often so busy trying to add to our lives that we forget the power of letting go, failing to realize that a cluttered life rarely has room for a clear vision or a peaceful heart. Furthermore, the idea of knowledge as an I suggests that our education should be more than just career skills. It should be about developing a moral and philosophical perspective. If our education doesn't help us see the suffering of others or the consequences of our actions, then we are effectively still blind. This verse challenges us to expand our definition of smart to include wise, reminding us that the most educated person in the room isn't the one with the most facts, but the one with the most insight. In a society obsessed with data, we need this reminder more than ever. We have more information than any generation in history, yet we often seem to have less sight when it comes to the things that truly provide meaning and direction to our existence. The idea that truth is the highest penance offers a refreshing take on what it means to be a good person. It suggests that morality isn't about following a long list of rules, but about having the inner resolve to stay true to one's principles. This kind of integrity is exhausting and difficult, which is why it is called a penance. It requires us to constantly monitor our thoughts and words, ensuring that we are not slipping into the easy comforts of white lies or self-deception. When we live this way, we become a light for others, showing that it is possible to exist in the world without compromising one's soul. It is a quiet form of heroism that doesn't require an audience, only a mirror and a conscience that refuses to be quieted. When we finally address the sorrow of attachment, we begin to understand why so many of us feel a persistent sense of lack despite our outward success. Attachment is like a thirst that can never be quenched because it is based on the false premise that external things can fix internal problems. By identifying raga, or attachment, as the root of sorrow, the verse invites us to practice a form of emotional independence. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent, but rather learning to love without the desperate need to own. It is the difference between enjoying the beauty of a sunset and trying to trap the sun in a box. One brings peace and wonder, while the other only brings frustration and the inevitable darkness of failure. In conclusion, this ancient Shloka serves as a timeless manifesto for anyone seeking a life of depth and purpose. It tells us that our eyes are for learning, our hearts are for truth, our minds are for detachment, and our souls are for giving. By following this path, we move away from the frantic, superficial layers of existence and toward a center that is calm, clear, and radiant. It is a message of hope that suggests that no matter how dark the world may seem, we always have the tools within us to find the light. We only need to choose the eye of knowledge, the path of truth, the freedom from attachment, and the joy of sacrifice to transform our lives from a series of accidental events into a masterpiece of conscious living.